everyone. Welcome back to Reclaim You. Today, Paige Thompson is joining us on the podcast. She is a licensed professional counselor with a practice in Philadelphia and virtually across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Vermont, and Ohio, where she specializes in providing therapy for folks struggling with eating disorders, athletes' mental health, and perinatal challenges. It was during Paige's time as a college athlete that she discovered the true value of therapy in caring for one's whole self, and she's passionate about supporting others and caring for their mental health. So welcome, Paige.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so grateful that you came on, and we're going to be talking all about athletes and mental health today.
I'm excited.
So to start the episode, what I've been asking folks is, what does Reclaim You mean to you?
Love that. I think right now in my life, I think too, we're like kind of always evolving. I feel like I say this and maybe I could have a different answer tomorrow. But right now I feel like it's kind of connecting to other people in my life in a really authentic way. I feel like I've done a lot of work and time kind of getting to know myself and connecting and kind of figuring out what my values are and what feels good for me. And that's also kind of now I feel like transitioned into finding other people who bring out like parts of myself I like, and I enjoy other people's company. And so, yeah, I feel like there's been times when my life has been centered around other things, but right now I feel like there's a theme of connection.
That's awesome. And I know that, because you are a collegiate athlete, I really wanted to connect with you on, working with folks who are athletes and the struggles that can come along with that. So yeah, I'm excited to talk more about that and your experience as an athlete, and even just like the process of reclaiming you through that experience of what it was like to, I would imagine, your world kind of consumed in athletics and then shifting out into something completely different and getting to know different parts of yourself all over again. So I feel like it's all interwoven.
It very much is. I feel like that's one of the reasons I love working with athletes, because some of it is a little bit of the specific to that experience, and some of it really is just like allowing them to, figure out who they are and outside of their sport.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about your experience as an athlete and kind of what that process was like for you?
Yeah, it's not the most traditional path or experience, and probably not even how my high school younger self would have envisioned this going. Having said that, I feel like it's definitely shaped who I am, and I wouldn't change any of it. Went through so my soccer was kind of like my sport. Went through the college recruitment process in high school. I played soccer all my life, and this is what I had decided I really wanted to do. And the recruiting process was kind of stressful, but ended up choosing a school that I felt really good about and felt excited. So once I got there was in any level of being a freshman, there was a big transition. There were nerves. There was a little bit of imposter syndrome of, can I keep up? And you're also meeting a brand people. So I would say that it was going well at first. And then kind of the challenges started to set in of I wasn't playing as much as I would like to, and I'm not finding my place both on and off the field, and being in a totally new culture too. There were so many elements of I grew up in the South, and I was in a relatively sheltered conservative area, and now I'm in this Northeast college environment. So there was that element on top of everything. Long story short, impacts of not playing that much and trying to find my place. I was, some depression and anxiety and things were brewing that were already, maybe there were some seeds planted already there, but it really kind of exacerbated those things and brought it out. And I really didn't have the coping skills or the capacity or the a way to cope with that in an effective way. There were things that I think back to that, looking back, I'm like, okay, that was not a big deal, but at the time absolutely does not feel that way in the moment.
For sure.
But not being on so when you travel, when our team traveled, only a certain number of people were allowed to go, or you could only have so many people on the bench. So whether you were injured or just not a part of the starting roster or close enough, you didn't travel. And that felt like such an isolating, devastating, honestly embarrassing experience. You stayed on campus, and I went to a small school, and everybody knew that your team was off playing, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to leave my dorm because I don't want to run into anybody.
Yeah.
So there are little things like that I feel like other, I don't know, maybe non-athletes just don't even think about. So yeah, that was a little bit of the struggle of the adjustment. I think this is where my path gets a little unusual. And why I'm so passionate about athletes' mental health is that all of those things ended up, combined with other things going on in my life and some predispositions and stuff, I ended up, kind of using food and exercise and all of these things to cope. And it got to the point where medical staff at the school and all of that diagnosed me with an eating disorder and pretty much told me that I needed to go seek a higher level of care treatment. And, in the athlete world, you don't miss a practice because you're sick. You don't miss, you know, there's no oh, I don't feel like it today, or I'm really tired, I'm not feeling my best. That's not an option. You show up no matter what. Fevers and, be injured, and you're still expected to show up to everything. So when I heard that, I was pretty much I was in denial. But long story short, ended up deciding to take a medical leave of absence towards the end of my sophomore year of, I guess, my first semester of sophomore year. So Thanksgiving break, I went home and I didn't come back. And at that time in my head, I'm I'm going to go home. I'm going to go do what they want me to do, go to treatment, and I will be back for the spring semester. No questions asked. And, my parents thought so too. And my coaches, everybody were that was okay, yeah. Little did I know kind of how extensive treatment is and how much work this is going to be. And this is not a quick fix type of situation. So over the course of being in treatment over Thanksgiving break, winter break, all of that, ultimately decided to extend my medical leave through the second semester of my sophomore year. And at that point, I thought, I was okay, I'm done. I will never be able to come back from this. They're not going to want me on the team. I'm kicked off. This is all I've known my whole life. I'm not going to graduate on time. Now, looking back, I'm it does not matter if you graduate on time. But that felt really big at the time.
Yeah, I imagine it did.
So, yeah, long story short, completed treatment, got to a much better place, and was ready to return to school. And have to give a shout out to my coach, my athletic trainer, our strength and conditioning coach. I could not have asked for a better support system. They were all extremely, extremely supportive, and we're pretty much just kind of whatever you need, we're here, whether you're here at school, whether you're at home and in treatment, whether you're coming back to play, whether you're coming back and not playing. They were very let me lead, which I know that is not everybody's experience. They're absolutely amazing, and I can't say enough good things about them. But so yeah, I came back to school, and at this point I'm trying to figure out, what does recovery look like and how do I mesh that with my athlete identity, because I was so ready to 100% be good, I can go back to playing, practice, lifting, all of these things that we're supposed to do, when really, for anybody who's been through treatment, you're taking your life and throwing it upside down, and it's pretty rattling. You're trying to go about living your life in an entirely different way. So I kind of played around with what this would look like. And like I said, because my coaches and staff and athletic trainer, all of them were so supportive and understanding, I ended up kind of I would practice here and there, but I wasn't expected. I didn't have to be there. I think I was also managing, at that point I needed to still be in therapy and see a dietitian and had a group and had medical appointments. And how am I supposed to manage all of that on top of school and athletics? So there were times when my therapy appointment interfered with practice, and I was able to go to therapy or show up late to practice or things like that. And I know that is not, a usual experience. So long story short, I returned to the sport, but in a completely different way, with a very new relationship with exercise. And there was a lot of trial and error, and still even, figuring out how to have a healthy relationship with exercise. But I wasn't ready to let go of I'm not on the team, or I'm not an athlete. And this has been a part of my life, my entire life, that I can remember. And do think it was really important for me to still have the support. My teammates were my best friends, and they were really instrumental in, making that transition back to school possible, and still some of my best friends to this day. But I think the coming to terms too with my role on the team and how that was going to look a little bit different than what I had envisioned. I became the hair braider, the cheerleader, the support person. And, at the time I was oh, that's embarrassing. And now I'm wait, I felt like I was able to eventually embrace it and see that it also, I still had an impact.
So much grief going through that experience, I would imagine, like losing what you expected it to be, and then time on the field and time at school, even, and relationships.
Yeah, definitely not how I envisioned college going. But like I said, it's now, I feel like, shaped so much of who I am and given me so much perspective too of like what feels like the end of the world in the moment is truly not, and probably a trajectory to a path that, allows you to live a life that feels a little bit more healthy or authentic or sustainable.
And I guess while we're talking about this, what do you see in your practice when you're working with folks who are athletes and also struggling with disordered eating or eating disorders? What, and I know with your lived experience, like you went through it, so you can understand it on a really deep level, but what do you feel like people are up against as they're going through that process?
A lot. I feel like
Uh-huh.
it, the one of the reasons I love working with athletes is they tend to be driven. They tend to be, high achieving and inquisitive and curious and want to learn. And I think that these are all really awesome qualities, but they also tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves. So that's the first thing I think of when he's like, what are you up against? And most of the time people are like, oh, it's me. I'm the meanest to myself. Like,
Mhm.
so there's, that critical part of us, the self kind of deprecating voice, whatever it is. Oftentimes there's coaches or staff too that, I was really lucky in my experience to have such supportive staff, but there are plenty of experiences and current athletes I work with now who that is like their biggest challenge to navigate, is this relationship with someone who has so much authority and so much power, seems to negatively impact their mental health, or not know how to, connect in a way that feels both like pushing someone and empowering.
With the pressure, I'm thinking about the pressure and just some of the other more common, I guess, mental health struggles for athletes that you see that are, yeah, the most common ones. How do you help folks navigate those things? I know the list can be very, very long, but I mean the pressure in and of itself to do school, to be an athlete, to get playing time, to rest, to go to strength and conditioning, to go to practice. Like there's so many boxes to check that I think mental health struggles are just so common and it's not talked about enough in athletics.
Absolutely. I think that, like, similar to what I said before, the qualities that make you a wonderful athlete and student, the driven, maybe some perfectionism, some self criticism, people pleasing because you want to please your coach and authorities and teammates, and all of those things are a lot of themes that come up in
Mhm.
therapy. And while we can, I think, similar to kind of the like IFS approach of like there are no bad parts, like we can appreciate that these things have served you in so many ways, and where are they also interfering or bringing us down or feeling really heavy. I think it's a lot of, I guess those are more of like the qualities which can lead to a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, eating disorders, a lot of, panic attacks with performance anxiety and things like that. I think all of that on top of, like, I think about just like the general age of onset when a lot of mental health conditions and challenges show up is like the college age. And so let's throw, some more pressure on top of that, and it becomes a bit of a pressure cooker.
Yeah. What do you feel like are some strategies to navigate?
I think a lot of mindfulness and self compassion, which I know when I like say this to some of my athletes, they're kind of, at the
It's like
first
eye
step,
roll.
yeah, little poo poo it, but like it really does work, and I like feel like I understand that it is hard to implement and to apply. We can also see a lot of like the building awareness around our thought patterns and a little bit of that CBT stuff of like how do the thoughts that we're having before we step on the field impact our, our performance or how much we're enjoying something. I think it's a lot of building awareness around our inner dialogue, our relationships, some mindfulness, being able to be in the present moment and fostering kind of resilience in a way that feels authentic to you. I feel like some people really, resonate with some of the self-compassion exercises, and some people don't, and I think it's figuring out what works for you.
Yeah. That self-compassion piece, I think that we talk about it like every podcast episode. It's so important. And people do. They're like, oh God, like that's so, whatever. But it really is super helpful to help build resilience, right? Like thinking about resilience, I'm thinking about soccer players, and I never played soccer, but like it can be kind of all eyes on you, right? Like, I mean, that feels like a lot of pressure. And then if you do something or mess up, and I don't know all the technical things of soccer, but if you mess up, it's kind of like it can feel really I don't know, like a dagger, you know, where these more kind of they're team-based sports, but there's also these like individual spotlights in a way. So resilience in every step of the process feels so important.
Absolutely. I think that, even thinking about how we bounce back from once, like you're explaining, like you lose the ball, like
Yeah.
how do you cope with that in the moment so that it doesn't bleed into the very next play or the next time that you have the opportunity to contribute on the field?
I was at a restaurant watching, I can't remember. Was it the World Cup? No, it was the Olympics. I don't know. It was in summer.
Recent was in the Olympics.
Okay. Yeah. The Olympics. Okay. And they were doing oh gosh, what's it called? I'm like field goals. It's not field goals. It's the kicking.
Penalty kicks.
That's it. Yeah. They're doing the kicks. And the one guy, he missed it, like epically missed it. And I had this like, oh, this poor guy. The world is watching. How does one kind of cope with that and bounce back from that? But that's the thing, like resilience, right? Like we're not going to be perfect all the time. It's just, that's a setup for failure to feel like you're going to get it every time, be perfect every time. But yeah, when I think about resilience, that plays in my mind. Like, that's so hard. That poor man. That poor man.
The perfect example and probably the epitome of like those kind of like high pressure, all eyes on you situation.
Yeah. Yeah. On smaller scales in college and high school and things like that. But still, yeah. Similar theme. And then what about burnout? So I feel like burnout is really common. I know that I experienced in college when I was an athlete, I experienced burnout, especially my senior year when I was, interning and schooling and rowing and working and doing all of the things. I was so burnt out. I think I like weaponized it against myself that I, didn't have what it took to do all of the things. But what do you see around burnout with the folks that you work with, or even throughout your story, how to just kind of like be with that and work through even maybe like signs of burnout too?
I think you make a really good point too, that one of the most common things I see is people putting it on themselves of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong or I'm causing this, versus like, can we take a step back and zoom out and see like what system, what pattern, what routine is happening here that is making you feel this way? Because it is a lot. Like you just named, I can't even name everything you just, like it's lifts, it's training meetings, so many team meetings, so many practices and doctor's appointments or PT and strength and conditioning, and on top of classes and trying to keep up with all of that. And it is exhausting. And I think,
like maybe having a social life, right?
Yeah. And whatever else is going on in your life, like family and things like that. No, I think that burnout is so real. And I think the quicker we can recognize it, the quicker we can tend to it. And sometimes like it feels like we don't have control over these things. Like, we can't really choose to not show up to lift or not show up to these things. So what can we do? Very small shifts, or what small shifts can we make in order, make even just your day feel a little more exciting? And sometimes that means adding things outside of your sport or outside of the kind of day-to-day tasks that you feel like you have to, cross off the list. I think keeping in mind too that like burnout doesn't happen overnight. It also doesn't, heal overnight. So giving yourself that space, and, if you, where you can, it's like taking a little bit of space. Like I'm thinking about even in our off season, we had, there's a wide spectrum of people who are in the gym every single day and, attending every single optional captain's practice and this and that. And, if you feel like you need a little bit of a break, like maybe giving yourself that permission to not do the most at all times. I'm a big believer that like we have off seasons for a reason, because we can't year round, because it will burn you out.
Yeah, and lead to injury and mental injury too, thinking about exacerbating symptoms of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, perfectionism. We could go on and on, but there are really real repercussions. And then sometimes just like ghosting the sport too. I know part of my story is my senior year, the second half of the year, I was like, I am out. I can't do this anymore. And I quit. And like, I'm okay with it. And I wonder what it would have been like to recognize how burnt out I was earlier on. So I didn't have to bounce my last semester of my college career.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a really common and real experience too. And I think there's also kind of a lot of strength in that, and recognizing like, okay, maybe I'm at the point of no return, or this is what I need in this moment. And that's okay. I think that within athletes too, there's a lot of stigma around, well, I can't quit. Like
I can't quit. Yeah.
I can't imagine life without this. What would that,
And probably ingrained really early. I think about folks who have been doing their sport for forever, right? Like your story, you did your sport your whole life. And, I know for me, there's a lot of belief around like, well, when you start something, you see it through, right? You go all the way. Like you don't stop, you just keep going, which right is a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
There's so much nuance in slowing down and realizing how to take care of yourself through the chaos and the hard and the good and everything.
And I think about that too. And I'm like, okay, if current Paige could go back and like redo college, like, wow, I probably would have like had so much fun and been a better player and been able to take care of myself, and thinking about like, well, that's not realistic. And thinking about all of these current college athletes, like they're also 18, 19,
Yeah.
20. Like we can't expect them to know how to navigate all of these things because they are little babies. They're
Yeah.
figuring out adulthood in the midst of all of this.
Yeah. And what they're supposed to be doing with the rest of their lives, right? Like the pressure is everywhere.
Huge part of being an athlete. It's, depending on your sport, a lot of the time it's a given that that's something that
Mhm.
you're going to experience at some point. I think there was a study in the Journal of Sports Medicine, I think it was, that was like athletes who are injured have more than double chance of developing depression. And I feel like that is
Mm.
so real, like
Yeah.
probably for so many things of like we've talked about, of that sense of identity that's wrapped up in your sport, and sense of accomplishment, and your social life is tied to your team and your teammates. And even I even think about like the amount of endorphins you might be used to from your sport on a daily basis to
Yeah.
then go to like no amount of movement.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there are so many things that go into being injured. I think a huge part of it, and I think about the college experience, is social isolation, of sitting on the sideline while everybody else is, participating. And that can feel so crappy. I think that all of these things are a part of the sport and not something we want to prevent injuries as much as possible, but not always preventable. So
Hmm.
when that does happen, to really be aware of like, maybe you're at higher risk of feeling down, and connecting to people, talking about how you're feeling, figuring out other ways to feel a part of the team or having a role. If it's giving yourself the time and space to do what you need to do to recover. Like I think about some really like big injuries, like surgeries and things like that. Like that's a whole other thing you have to incorporate into your schedule, is like PT and rehab and all of this. And so giving yourself some grace, that
Hmm.
that is a huge responsibility, and trying to prioritize your health and normalizing that that's an experience that a lot of people have gone through. So maybe even being able to connect or talk with other teammates, other athletes, other people who can relate to your experience, because there certainly are people, but in the moment I know it can feel like you're the only one who's having to take a step back or not do what you love or be able to participate.
Yeah. That isolation and loneliness and again, like kind of like weaponizing whatever is churning in your head against yourself, that like there's something wrong with you, or you did something wrong, or you're not good enough, or whatever it is. It feels important to name those things if they're coming up for folks as they're kind of navigating recovery and coming back, and like what it all means, and maybe it doesn't mean anything about you and your personhood.
Absolutely. I even think about like, there were times when I was in the training room because you were doing your rehab and the coach makes an announcement and you're like, wait, how did I not know about this?
Uh-huh.
Like, because you were taking care of yourself and doing what you needed to do, and it was no fault of your own. You were doing exactly what you should be doing, and it sucks.
Yeah, it does suck. It's really hard. And then there's that whole transition from identifying as an athlete to not identifying as an athlete. And that I think is such a hard transition for people. I know it was for me, and like what relationship with movement could look like, or what my assumption of what it should look like would
Mhm.
be, and even like rebelling against movement because you didn't have to do it anymore, and then who you are outside of being an athlete is like part of your primary identities, even though you can still be an athlete and not be like actively participating in your sport the way that you once had. But yeah, all that to say, can you talk a little bit about that transition, and yeah, just maybe some like insights on how to navigate that.
Yeah, I think you gave a great example of there is a wide spectrum of how I have seen people respond to, that transition away from your athletic career. And, some people go and, pick up marathons, and other people are like, I am not working out at all. And I think that you kind of have to give yourself some space to figure that out. I think that that's something that there's no right or wrong way to do it. I always encourage people to try different things, finding an enjoyable form of movement. For me at first it was like running, and then I was like, wait, actually I really like group fitness classes, or figuring out also what fulfills a little bit of a competitive side, if that's still there, in a healthy way, of course. I think that the biggest things that like I see, which I know we've named a lot of the like social aspect of being an athlete, is also that sense of community. And you're, in college, you're playing with your teammates, you're in class with your teammates, you're often living with your teammates. Like these are people who are, you have this built-in super tight-knit community. And for me personally, that was probably like the biggest thing that I noticed of like, wait a second, I have to go make friends. I've never had to make friends before because they've always been my teammates and built in. So I think normalizing that experience, that like it's okay if it's a hard transition. I would encourage people to like put themselves out there in some way. And, sometimes that includes, that could be a form of movement. Like I know a lot of people who would go and join, the rec league of whatever sport they played. I think the identity piece is a big thing, and like that's where I'm also a big proponent of therapy. Like it is okay for this to be hard and to go and talk about it and process it, but I think there's also a lot of strengths that you can walk away from the athletic experience with, and like leveraging your skills, whether that's like for your career or in your personal life, whether that's leadership and communication and time management and resilience and all of these things that feel so important and also helpful and so many aspects of life. I think that the other piece of the identity thing is almost like we're at risk or susceptible to throwing ourselves into something else, i.e., work, and really feeling like we need to make that our whole being because we have this gap or this hole that we feel like we need to fill. And while I think that work ethic we're used to having can be super beneficial in a lot of ways, it also can make it really hard to have some healthy boundaries and balance in life. So that would be, I guess, and when it comes to advice, that would be my thing, to be mindful about balance. That a lot of the time in college and other aspects of athletics, like you're told when to show up, you're told when to, like, I don't know, when your season is, and like you have all of this, there's a lot of rigidity and rules and structure, I guess is the right word. And so you have this newfound sense of freedom and to enjoy that, but also kind of maybe tread lightly with it, that be mindful of how we're using it.
Like a free fall to not have things holding you and places to turn to all of the time. So yeah, it can turn on its head, and like creating pressure elsewhere too, right? Like the pressure of the sport and showing up and doing all the things, and it's kind of like you're used to that sense of just kind of like bracing and hypervigilance. So it's really easy, like you said, to fill the space with something maybe similar.
Yeah, we want that sense of accomplishment and validation and all of those things that we got from our sport.
Yeah, which is super valid and important to kind of play with and figure out like what else might exist in life without this.
Yeah, how can I get these needs fulfilled in ways that are not going to cause burnout?
Yes. Do you feel like that was one of the biggest lessons you learned, or were there other lessons that you feel like you learned throughout your experience as an athlete and afterwards growing into the person that you are?
Yeah, I feel like that's such a hard one to like narrow down into a small, like, one answer. But I guess that does kind of answer like the balance aspect of it, of especially a journey of stepping away from the sport for a little while and trying to return and like engage with it in a new way, of finding the importance of balance. That if you're not enjoying your sport, it's not like you're going to get burnt out. If you're pushing yourself too hard, you're going to injure yourself. If you're not having balance in terms of also having a social life and things outside of your sport, then that's also going to be a problem. And I think that theme or that goal of balance feels really important in my current life, and something I'll want to keep in mind moving forward too, of whether it's family and friends and work and learning and all of these things, that I think athletics has also shown me that I'm capable of, like, holding or wearing many hats, or juggling multiple things at once, and that it's okay to try new things and be a beginner at something.
Yeah. Is there anything else you feel like you want to add to the conversation that we haven't covered?
I guess a little bit of the overlap between athletes and eating disorders. I think that the eating disorders are, much more prevalent than we even realize in society. And I think athletes in particular, the amount of athletes with eating disorder is like more than double. I mean, I don't have the exact statistic, but I know that I have looked it up before because I wrote a blog post on it. More than double the general population, which to me is not a surprise at all.
Yeah.
But just kind of shedding some light on that this is a really susceptible population because of some of those qualities that we named, when you're the perfectionism, the high achieving, maybe some of the people pleasing and hard work ethic, maybe a little bit of black and white thinking. We tend to go all out. Things that can be really wonderful also make us susceptible. So just being mindful of like getting accurate and like good information around things like nutrition and a healthy relationship with exercise. And like I'm thinking about even like the college experience and how prevalent like the freshman 15 conversation was, and the culture around food and the dining hall. And I think being aware of these diet culture messages and how they can collide with sports, and you can be pretty vulnerable to engaging with food and exercise in a way that can be harmful in the long run. And even thinking about, I remember when I was like going through my recovery, reading, if you like Google, eating disorders in athletes, like it talks a lot about, there's gymnasts, figure skaters, people or sports that are centered around like appearance or weight, wrestling, all of those things are especially susceptible. And I remember thinking like, I feel like they're missing something here, because I feel like it's all athletes. Yes, that is true. Like there is an emphasis on appearance and weight and in those sports. And I think that, as athletes, you're also getting a lot of like information, whether from parents or coaches or qualified quote unquote trainers who are telling you that you should be eating this way and that you should be working out this way. And you're just getting inundated with information. And we have to kind of take it with a grain of salt that some of that can really stick and be harmful.
If there were just like a handful of warning signs for athletes and athletes who might be experiencing an eating disorder or disordered eating,
feeling like there's a right and a wrong thing to eat, injuries that you're not, maybe more frequent injuries or injuries that don't really make a ton of sense, so like overuse type things, or like it wasn't a collision or something, but this is just really like, why do I feel like I can't catch a break? Maybe we're not, there's something called REDS, relative energy deficiency in your sport, and I think female athletes in particular are really susceptible to this. So yeah, anything like that where we are feeling it in our bodies. It could be fatigue, it could be injuries, it could be even like things like hair loss and brittle nails and being cold all the time. Those are more of the like physical signs. But I feel like even when it comes to like our mental and emotional health, like isolation or feeling like you're like you have to, I don't know, follow a specific plan, or that what you're doing is not enough. Maybe that self-critical part is really loud. I think that those are some of the things that come to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful.
Anything you would add to that?
No, I mean, I feel like, yeah, you hit the big ones. And it's so hard, I think, to be an athlete and to reconcile that something might be going on because you don't want to. For the most part, you don't want to like leave or jeopardize your spot on the team or on the field or whatever it is. But I think that's where it's so important to reach out to folks who work with athletes and have knowledge of eating disorders so that they can support you in making some really big and often hard decisions that will support you and your health for the long run, because it's like we have to look past, and it's hard to look past the college career or even high school, right? It's hard to look past that, but there's so much more life to live. And yeah, people can help get you to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really good point too about providers that are informed. That was something that still to this day I run into with clients, that I ran into in my own experience of like, one doctor is praising me for having a low heart rate, and the next doctor is like, no, this is like, the eating disorder informed doctor is like, no, this is a really bad sign of being malnourished.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not gotten that second opinion, that's really dangerous.
It is. Yeah. Well, we're so lucky that people like you exist. So tell us where folks can find you. So Paige, of course, is an eating disorder therapist like we talked about, and she specializes in treating athletes. So yeah, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me at paigethompsonlpc.com, which is my website. That is probably the easiest way.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little contact form in there. I also like really love finding people therapists. So even if like I'm not the right fit, you're not in one of the states I'm licensed in, like that is something that I feel really passionate about, is helping people get connected to someone who is the right fit. So that is go look, reach out to, whether it's me or somebody else. Like most of the time, or I can't speak for all therapists, but I do really feel like that's something that I love doing, is connecting someone with resources, whether that is me or someone else or a system.
And Paige has a blog, so check out her blog too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll link to that one blog post that you mentioned so that folks can look at that. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat about this. Like I said, we're grateful that you're doing this work. Much needed.
Thank you. It is something I really, really enjoy. So I am happy to be able to do it.
Okay, everybody, we'll be back next week for another episode. So until then, take good care.